In the last video you would have seen how to do access control based on the token issued from a username password request. Now that is generally not sufficient because a token request would expire eventually. So most of the token based solutions also have another token which is called refresh token. And the whole point of refresh token is that it has an expiry slightly longer than regular tokens. And if you could use a refresh token to really refresh your earlier issued token. If you let both of them expire, then the only option that is left with you is to send a username and password request and re-authenticate yourself. So let's look at how do we do something like that if we wanted to do that in our system. So very first thing that we want to do is basically look at our user entity. Now if you look at our user entity, it has basically a auth token field and an expiry field. We need to create two more fields, one that should support refresh token, another is that refresh expiry. And we can now just generate the getters and setters for this. Now that we have these two, we also need to create a unique constraint for refresh token as well. So now that we have done that, we need to see how do we change the code to handle it. Now the very first thing that we need to do is wherever we are creating the tokens, we also need to create a refresh token as well. So let's go back to our username password provider. That's where we are creating tokens. So we also need to refresh. We also need to create the refresh token when we create a new token. So we can do set refresh token. And we generate a new token. Similarly for expiry, we need to have it longer. So let's say our refresh expiry is 24 hours. So we add another 24 hours and then we set that. So now we have it properly done. We have initialized the refresh token as well as the refresh expiry. The next thing that we need to do is look at our login response object and return the refresh token and refresh expiry as well from there. We can also add a new constructor. We can change this constructor itself because we are not using any other constructor. Where we need to pass a refresh token as well as refresh expiry, and we assign them now. Wherever we are, when we do authenticate, at that time we need to initialize these two fields as well. So we pass them on to the constructor, so we have done that. Now once this is done, now we need to see that if an incoming request comes in, so very first thing is that let's define another URL which is nothing but used for refreshing the token. So let's call it refresh, and the refresh token should not contain the login request, but it should actually contain we will use the principal to extract token from it. So we can just say token principal, and once we get the token principal back, we can pull out a user entity that belongs to that particular. Actually, for user entity we can use the username itself, which is part of principal. So we don't need this if condition here. We can just do find by username, and if the user exists, we pull out the user entity, and here we have to return this new login response which contains all this stuff. The only difference being that we will assume that the new refresh token is already generated, and that part should be done. Actually here itself we have to do that. So what we do here is the code that we have in the provider for generating the token, we need access to that. So let's create a new new utils kind of class where we can use it. So we do not have a utils package, so let's create a new package called utils. And now let's go to username password provider, and we can move this function refactor, move instance method, let's see. Okay, let's just cut and paste it. So we cut it from here and we paste it into a class in utils. Let's call it token utilities, and we move it there and we make it static because we can directly use it. We don't need to create an instance of it. Now we go back and fix the provider class. We call token utilities generate token. So we will also make it public. So now that this is done, we have two options. We can either generate a new refresh token right within the provider in the same way that we are generating for username and password provider, which to me does not look like a good idea. A provider should only be doing validation of the requests, while the actual work should be performed within the endpoint. So we will move this code out of this and move to endpoint. First, let's implement the authentication endpoint for this. So basically what we are saying is, we say string auth token equal to token utilities dot generate token, and refresh token equal to token utilities dot so we generated two tokens. Now we need the whole expiry code as well. So let's basically take this code and we make another private method within token utilities, call public static string generate token expiry, and rather than string we make a date, we can also, we want both the expiries to be generated together. So let's create another utility class which contains two dates, and let's call it, it basically just contains to date and we can generate a constructor for it, and we can generate getters and setters for it. Now we go there and we can generate date expiry equal to this, and then we add another 24 hours. This will guarantee that there is an exact 24-hour difference between both the expiries. Otherwise, they may be off by few milliseconds here and there, and it's not a big problem, but just to be clean. So this method will generate both the expiries. We return expiry values from it. And now let's go to our endpoint. Here what we do is expiry values equal to token utilities generate token expiry. So now we get both the expiries here. Now we set these values within user entity. So now all the expiries have been set, and we can save our object, the user entity object, and these are the values now that will go, which are the new expiries. And we can create a private method which we will use in the other guy also. So we can say private void refresh tokens, and we pass a user entity to it, and we basically call all these lines here. And we call it here. Now same thing we have to do here. We just in the authenticate method also we can just refresh tokens, and now once we have done that, we can remove this from the username password provider, because now all these tokens are getting generated here. So let's get rid of all of this, we don't need any of this, and we are all set with this. Now the only thing that we need to figure out, how do we authenticate with refresh token? Right now if you see, the only way we are authenticating the request is with the auth token, not with the refresh token. And we also need to change the path for it, because right now these are pointing to the same one. So we can say value equal to slash refresh. So if you call slash authenticate slash refresh, that's when this endpoint will get called. And now we adjust for it in the do filter class. Now before we do that, we have to somehow differentiate whether this is a request for a auth token or a refresh token. And if the request is for refresh token, we know that the only condition the refresh token will be ever called is when there are two preconditions to it. In all other cases, the regular token gets called, except when somebody is calling refresh endpoint. So we can use that condition to differentiate. So let's create a boolean here. Let's say boolean type of token equal to, let's define a tiny enum here which we will use. So let's make it enum, type of token is auth token, but if http request dot get request URI dot toString is equal to slash authenticate slash refresh, in that condition we want type of token to be a refresh token. So now this is how we have differentiated. Now this fact that it's a refresh token also needs to be passed along. So the best way to do that, we look at our token principal, and in our token principal we add another field, which is, before doing that, I think we will need that enum here as well. So let's move that enum from the auth filter into this. So refactor, move inner class to another class, and the class that we want to move it to is token principal. So we do refactor. If you use move with refactor, if you see here, it will automatically adjust the code, and that's why we have done it this way. If you look at here, it has already changed it to token principal. So now we go here, we define a private type of token as type of token, and let's generate getters and setters for this. And we pass a second argument, that is type of token. And in the second constructor, we can pass a first argument So now if you see, this is the original authenticate code, and in this particular case, because it is being used as a response, here the type of token will always be the type of token will always be auth token. This is authenticate method of token provider. So let's go there. Now here if you see, this is the other one where we are now this condition, what we are really doing is we are initiating a token request, and we have the type of token defined here. So this will set it to correctly whether the type of token to be used is refresh token or a auth token. If the URL was authenticate/refresh, it will use refresh token, otherwise it will use auth token. So this should take care of that part. Now we go to token principal again. I think everything else has been taken care of. Now what we need to do is go to token provider, and we handle this. So within the token provider, if you really see, we are querying the database table based on auth token, and this is where we need to make sure we query the right one. So what we need to do is, let's make optional user entity OUE equal to optional dot null optional dot empty, and then we check if principal dot get token get type of token is equal to type of token dot auth token, then whatever we are doing is the right thing. So let's do exception case where we check for refresh token, otherwise we do auth token, else this is the correct one. For refresh token, we do find by refresh token, which we have not yet defined. And let's define it. Let's just copy the query from previous guy. And so I think now we are set. So if we call the request using, if we call the request using the regular token, then that will be assigned, otherwise we will assign we will search for the refresh token and use that. Now, only other security thing that we want to do is that if somebody is calling refresh token, we should only allow a refresh role for it. He should not be able to perform any other operation. So, what we really do is, if you see, we need to pass a granted authority list in the pre-authentication token. It's collection of, so let us make sure that is, so collection of granted authorities CGA is equal to, let it be null. Now, if we are passing the auth token, then we know what to do. We can just say collection of granted authorities is equal to whatever we have here. We can just use this code. Whatever mask comes in, we are just going to use it. So, whatever roles are assigned to the user, that is what will come here. Now, here we do not, okay, so we cannot do it here, we have to do it here after we have gotten it. So, let us do it here. We take this if condition, we also bring the granted authority here. Now, in this case what we need to do is, we need to only use the mask provided by the refresh role. So, this is our refresh role. Let us see whether the getter is defined or not. Yeah, we do not have a getter defined. So, let us define a getter here. So, this guy is returning an int, so let us make it a long. We need a collection of granted authorities, get authorities from role returns so let us call it set of user authority. Now, if this was not the case, then we just take the user mask, which is the same code here, and we pass it on. So, now you can see we are setting the right set of roles. If the user came in with any auth token, we look at his mask, whatever he is allowed, we set those rules. Otherwise, we only set the refresh role. This is just an additional bit of security, that just in case somebody can get access to auth tokens, and if they have a refresh token, the only thing they can do is call refresh. So, I think this is what it is, and with this we will be able to generate a refresh token. So let's run this code. Okay, so it is running. Now let's get our postman. So let's say first thing that we do is we want to log in. So we do a post again. So now if you see, we have got two sets of auth tokens. There is a auth token which has a expiry, which is basically from now it is almost 24 hours later, and the next expiry is 48 hours later, which is for the refresh token. And now as you can see, we can use the auth token to call any endpoint, which is our hello endpoint. It comes, but if we wanted to do refresh, then we can use this other auth token. So let's say what we want to do is we want to refresh our token. Then we are going to use header as X token, and what we pass on is, if we pass on, let's say we pass on auth token header, ideally we should get an error because we don't allow people to refresh their token using auth tokens. So if we pass this and say run, we get a 401, which is authentication failure. But if we pass the refresh token, we are still getting a starts with B, ends with 4. Yeah, we are still getting an error. Now one of the issues that we are facing, that if there is any error, it will try to redirect it to error URL, and it tries to authenticate that error URL as well. So one thing that we need to do is we disable the authentication of the error URL, and to do that we basically go to our security configuration, and within that we already had defined a exception for /user. Similarly, we define an exception for error as well. Now let's run it and see what happens. So now it's fine, we are getting a method not allowed. That is, so this is actually the error that we were getting, which was getting masked by the authentication problem. So now we go and look at our authentication endpoint. In the refresh, we have asked for a post method, while we should be asking for get, because get is enough, there is no packet that is coming in. And now we can run it and see what happens. So now you can see our request is refreshed and we have new sets of refresh tokens. If I want to refresh it again, it will give me error because the refresh token has now changed. If I run it again, we get authentication failure. If we go to hello endpoint and run it again, we will get an authentication failure. So, and if we want it to work, we need to have the old auth token, which we have lost now. So we can log in again and get a new sets of tokens. This is our refresh token. Now we can go to refresh and provide this token here, and we can refresh it again. Now we can take this new auth token that we got and we can call our hello endpoint. Yeah, it works. So this is about having an endpoint for refresh. Similarly, you could have another endpoint that just validates, because if you are running this identity server, this authentication mechanism as a separate instance, you want to provide an endpoint which will just authenticate, basically just check. So we can have a method called, let's say, validate, and the validate method will have only a auth token coming in, which will be part of this request. So let's call it validate, and the method has to be get, and again here we just downcast the authentication object, and actually we can just copy the code from the downwards, which is more relevant in this case, and here, and we, rather than finding it by username, here we are going to find by actually the principal contains name by the time it reaches there. So we can just find it by username, and we can check if the user is present. We can just return if the auth token, return UE dot get auth token is equal to principal dot. Actually, if it has reached here, all this is already done. So we can just return our response, which is this. We don't need to refresh anything. We just need to return whatever was part of our database, and if it has reached here, it has already gone through all validation requests, and we can set a path that equal to slash validate, and I think that's just about it. So we can run this request, and this can be used by any third party service that gets a auth token from us and wants to validate back with us whether it was a successful token or not. So let's say we call, rather than refresh, rather than hello, we can call authenticate slash validate, and the same auth token is sufficient, and we send it, we get the auth tokens back. So that's basically, I think those are the three main operations that any authentication system needs to have. There are some other things related to how the roles are managed, and those we will talk about in the next video. For now, I think this is a good ending point for this video. We have a complete authentication system built in, and all the, right now, anything that is not part of exception in our security configuration will by default be authenticated, and if the request reaches the endpoint, it means it's a valid user, and you could get the user by from the security context or by a authentication object injected into the request. So if you like this video, please subscribe, hit the like button, send it with your friends who might be interested in it, and thank you for watching this video. We will be posting additional videos in a few days. The plan is to have at least 2 to 3 videos every week, so please look out for those, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.